Japan intercontinental ballistic missiles. Each one carries 3 nuclear warheads. If this were the beginning of World War III, they would reach their targets in the Soviet Union in the time it takes to watch this film. By that time, Soviet missiles would be on their way here. Populations on both sides could expect about 15 minutes warning. The Soviet Union has enough warheads in its strategic stockpile to strike every community in North America with a population of 2,000 people. The US has considerably more. Should all-out war come, there is a high probability that most people living in the Canadian West will find themselves in the front line. To begin with, any city with jet service is sure to be on someone's target list. An airport that can handle a DC-10 can service fighters and bombers. In the event of serious war, every airport on an Air Canada or CP Air timetable would necessarily be a target. Without its communication and transportation system, the Canadian economy can't function. A few well-placed bombs on the cities where these facilities are concentrated would effectively cut the country in half and eliminate it as a serious threat to anyone. From this information alone, we can conclude that priority targets in an all-out war would include every city on the prairies over 50,000 in population. Other likely targets are strategic minerals, oil fields and refineries, uranium, nickel, and power sources like the chain of generating stations along the Nelson River. A 1 megaton bomb is a medium-sized warhead by today's standards. It's about 80 times as powerful as the one that destroyed Hiroshima. Exploded in the air over the downtown core on a business day, it would utterly destroy a city. There might be 15 or 20 minutes warning, with no possibility of finding effective shelter. Most people would probably just try to get home, to be with their families. Few would make it. Everyone in the downtown area would be killed instantly, vaporized. The dust that had been buildings, cars, and people would be sucked up into the mushroom to become fallout. This level of destruction would extend as far as 3 kilometers from the center of the blast. Inner city residential areas would explode in flames. Cars would melt. In the suburbs, paint would burn. Most buildings would be totally destroyed. People would be hurled into the rubble. Even as far away as the distant outskirts, houses would catch fire. Exposed flesh would burn. Anyone looking at the blast would be blinded. In total, perhaps 500,000 dead and severely injured. Dr. Ian Carr is a Winnipeg pathologist and a member of Physicians for Social Responsibility.
The picture that has been drawn is of the few surviving healthcare personnel stumbling through what's left of the streets looking for what's left of the patients. And it has been calculated that in such a circumstance, though not for Winnipeg, it would take the surviving doctors something like a week to see each injured patient just once, even if the doctor worked 18 hours a day and even if the doctor gave 10 minutes and 10 minutes only to each injured patient. That's the chance the survivors would have. So when we talk of injured in a nuclear war, nearly always we are talking about dead within a week or dead within 2 weeks. The hospitals, the healthcare facilities will be destroyed.
In recent years, NATO's strategy, led by the US, has shifted from all-out mutual destruction to so-called limited nuclear war, a war between military forces in which large population centers would be spared. This is an attractive concept to many because it seems to promise a war fought by other people on battlefields far from home. But for prairie people, nothing could be further from the truth. This is the front line of a limited nuclear war, the grain fields of North Dakota and Montana along the Canadian border. For the past 25 years, farmers here have been harvesting their crops amid active preparations for that war. Grand Forks, North Dakota is home to the 319th Strategic Bomb Wing of the U.S. Air Force Strategic Air Command. A squadron of B-52 bombers and their fuel tankers has been stationed here for 2 decades, waiting for that one big day. The bomb bay of one B-52 carries more destructive force than the total of all bombs dropped by both sides in World War II. And though these aircraft are old, in many cases older than the men who crew them, new techniques, new equipment, and new weapons make these planes a potent and continuing threat. There are 4 SAC bases in Montana and North Dakota. The first object of any Soviet attack would be to make sure their planes never got off the ground. But for people living around here, and for Canadians living a few miles north, these bases are only the beginning of the problem. North Dakota, should it ever declare its independence, would be the 3rd largest nuclear power in the world. Most of that power is hidden in almost invisible underground silos, scattered over thousands of square miles around each base. Each silo contains a Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile, capable of reaching any target, anywhere in the world, within half an hour of launch.
All crews insert launch keys. All crews insert launch keys. Acknowledge now. Out.
The men who will launch these missiles go through endless exercises to improve their efficiency and to guard against accident.
All crews perform tactical launch checklist. PLCA 07. Unlock
07.
Alpha. Bravo. Charlie.
PLCA.
November, Mike.
Command message OPR push button be pressed, illuminated out.
Alpha. Sierra.
6.
Alpha. Papa. I say
Transmission
again.
mode rotary switch to cable. We've got 5-9.
I agree.
ICBMs are the most dangerous and frightening of all nuclear weapons. Once launched, they cannot be recalled or disarmed. And each missile carries 3 separate warheads.
Tile. Release.
In the nuclear age, a military exchange means an exchange of missiles. These silos, as prime weapons, are also prime targets.
Launch in process.
1, 2, 3. We have 6 sorties gone.
There are 150 silos located in the Grand Forks missile field. A further 150 are in the area around the Minot base, and a large wing of 200 silos surrounds the Malmstrom Air Force Base near Great Falls, Montana. Each silo must be struck by 2 separate 1-megaton warheads to ensure its destruction. A total of 1,000 H-bombs exploding within a matter of minutes. And because the missiles are so well protected by their steel and concrete covers, the bombs must be exploded on the ground within 100 meters of the silo. This type of explosion creates far more fallout than the mid-air detonations that would be used against cities. In his book, Nuclear Nightmares, Nigel Calder quotes an official U.S. study which predicts that such an attack would cause up to 16.3 million American deaths, plus about 790,000 Canadian deaths, mainly due to fallout over Winnipeg. Frightening though these figures are, Ian Carr feels they may fall far short of reality.
I think the first problem is that nobody has ever exploded a 1 megaton bomb at ground level over dry land and followed the fallout. I think the second problem is that nobody has even imagined the effects in terms of air turbulence of the simultaneous explosion of 1,000 megatons over a relatively limited ground area. The recent natural explosion at Mount Helens was of the order of 2 to 3 megatons, and the fallout maps from that show that there was volcanic detritus fell over substantially the whole of populated North America and Canada. The estimates that we're given on fallout from 1,000 megatons on the silos depend on ordinary wind patterns and are, in my view, inaccurate, misleading, and certainly underestimates.
A storm of 1,000 simultaneous explosions, some as close as 5 kilometers from the Canadian border. Their deadly mushrooms spreading and joining to form one vast cloud of super radioactive dust. If the wind is from the south, Winnipeg, Regina, and even Calgary will begin receiving this fallout within hours. It will take longer to reach Edmonton and Saskatoon, but soon nowhere on the prairies will be safe. As fallout approaches, selected government personnel will be advised to move to regional emergency government headquarters, a safe distance from provincial capitals. In Manitoba, this means an earth-covered bunker 200 kilometers west of Winnipeg. This bunker is the regional link with the National Warning Office at NORAD headquarters. In emergency, it will become a center of communication and government. It is here that warning of an impending attack will first be received. Captain Pete Whittick is the man responsible for keeping this shelter in readiness.
This building is a two-story reinforced concrete building. It's earth-covered and sealed against outside air. In it we have food for the people, sleeping quarters, there's working areas, we have a 5-bed hospital and a cafeteria. The building is totally air-conditioned, and we have emergency backup diesel power.
300 people will converge here. They will find offices waiting and telephones, if they still work, from which they will try to maintain essential services in their region. Water and power sources are inside the shelter. Air is filtered, and contamination is carefully excluded. Sophisticated equipment keeps constant track of radiation and carbon monoxide levels. From a booth inside the shelter, a CBC announcer will broadcast news and instructions. But there is a strong possibility that the broadcasts will never be heard. One of the side effects of nuclear blast is its electromagnetic pulse. Even in the case of a small bomb, this pulse is enough to knock out transmitters and receivers for many miles around. So the people in the towns and cities may be left with virtually no communication as they wait for the fallout to arrive. But where will they wait? How safe can they be?
Emergency Planning Canada.
A government department charged with coordinating civil defense is Emergency Planning Canada. But emergency planning has a small budget and a tiny staff, and they must plan for peacetime emergencies as well as wartime civil defense. There is really not much they can do. In charge of EPC's Winnipeg office is Bill Willis.
Well, I personally believe, and I've been in this business one heck of a long time now, I certainly believe that the tendency is for the individual to seek the shelter in his home, where he has water, the food. It's a natural congregant spot for his family. And it's a place where his relatives would think, Grandma wants to know what's happened to her kids, her grandchildren. I believe it's a discreet thing to do when we don't have a major shelter program that protects all the individuals totally.
To help us along, Emergency Planning Canada publishes brochures on family shelter plans. But these are from the 1960s. One is even signed by John Diefenbaker. And today's short warning times are forcing the government to take a new approach.
Well, the federal government, in dialogue with the provinces, agreed to have a survey of likely public shelters. And I differentiate between the individual shelter in a home and the public shelter, which is congregate, to select buildings that had certain habitability features and could provide some security from fallout to larger numbers of individuals, people who might be working downtown and because of the sequence of events might not be able to get to their homes or normal places of residence.
But office high-rises are not fallout shelters. They can never provide protection anything like the government bunkers. Whether the public shelter program can offer any reassurance is at best questionable. Dr. Ian Carr.
I cannot see that it would be possible to provide adequate fallout protection for more than a small percentage of Winnipeggers. Firstly, because I am not clear that there are enough shelter spaces to put all these people in. Secondly, I'm not clear that the filtering and the air conditioning is good enough. Thirdly, I am not clear that there is any possibility of stocking enough food and water to keep these people in these shelters for at least 2 weeks. We're talking of shelter survival for at least 2 weeks. I am not clear that there are any plans for medical care for the sick in such shelters. And finally, I shudder to think of what they will come out to. They will come out to a land polluted with the radiation that they have only temporarily escaped.
An environment polluted to the point where everything we handle or eat will need careful washing. But the water itself may be loaded with fallout. And how many of us will have the equipment to tell us what is safe? Radiation is invisible. It can't be tasted, and it has no smell. In the countryside, the fallout would descend on the soil and the crops needed to feed survivors. Mature grain crops might survive, but the grain would be contaminated. Leafy plants take up strontium-90 and would be poisonous to eat. So would cattle, if they survived at all. Agriculture Canada publishes a small booklet of advice to farmers on what to do in the event of nuclear war. Blaine Peterson operates a cattle feed lot in southern Manitoba. He feels that the government's advice is largely unrealistic and unworkable.
They suggest in there, head for cover for your family and that, which is possible, I suppose. They also recommend you cover your livestock, cover your feed, even your water supply. In our case, our cattle run outside all year long. There's no cover for them at all. Our feed is stored outside, and even our water comes from a dugout. And I just can't see it being possible at all to cover that with any kind of cover. Looking through the book, they also recommend you remove your topsoil to a depth of 2 to 4 inches. On a lot of our topsoil, we only have 6 inches of topsoil, and where you would put it, even if you did have the machinery to take it off, is something I don't know, and that's just not possible.
Equipment left in the open will be covered with fallout. It will require careful cleaning by someone wearing protective clothing. Assuming that such cleaning is done and that fuel is available, the soil will still be full of poison, and every puff of dust will be a hazard to the man who creates it. But in the few hours they may have to prepare themselves, most farmers will find even the simplest precautions beyond their reach.
When the warning comes, I guess we'll just head for safety ourselves and let things look after themselves out here.
And, like the rest of us, Blaine Peterson will emerge, if he survives the first 2 weeks, to a toxic wasteland. He may well have traded a relatively quick death for a slower one of radiation sickness, starvation, or cancer, in a land that had so recently been the breadbasket of the world. And all this destruction would be the result of a limited war. Its targets would be military. Its victims would be all of us. Until now, Canadians have always fought their wars on someone else's soil. There has always been someone else to take the worst of the blows and keep the rest of us from serious harm. It's hard for us to face the terrifying reality that, should the unthinkable happen, it may well happen right here. And that when it does, there will be no place to hide.
To go the long distance to provide blast and fallout shelters for 100% of the population would be just into the billions of dollars. And so at all times the bottom line is to save lives, but at the same time we have to be realistic and look to the various options we have. And so one of the big options is to have the public understand what they can do for themselves.
We agree with that. And in our view, the adequate public information program should emphasize the fact that for the vast majority of urban population in a nuclear war, there will be no survival, there can be no effective civil defense. This does not mean that civil defense against non-nuclear accidents isn't valuable. It is. This does not mean that there are possibilities of isolated nuclear explosions against which we need civil defense. Of course we need it. It does mean that when we talk about civil defense, we must not kid the population that there is possible effective civil defense against major nuclear attack, direct or indirect. There just isn't.